Have you ever noticed how a father's silence can echo louder and last longer than the words he speaks aloud? Imagine Rostam, a mighty warrior from ancient Persia, standing on a battlefield, confronting a fierce young opponent named Sohrab. Neither knows the other's true identity. As Rostam strikes the fatal blow, he suddenly sees the familiar eyes of his son, recognizing too late the tragic truth. He has unwittingly slain his own child. In this moment, Rostam's agony is not just about the loss itself, but about the devastating consequences of silence and emotional distance. Carl Jung saw stories like these not merely as tragedies, but as powerful mirrors reflecting our deepest emotional truths. Yet you might wonder, how does this ancient tragedy relate to your own life today? Consider Marcus, a successful man in his 40s. All his life, Marcus carried a quiet ache. His father never once said, "I love you." Marcus grew up convinced his father was emotionally distant, indifferent even. But after his father's death, Marcus discovered a letter tucked away among his father's belongings, words his father had written but never sent, words full of affection, pride, and love. Suddenly, Marcus understood the profound truth. His father's silence was never empty. Instead, it was heavy with emotions never expressed, love left unspoken. Carl Jung taught us that fathers leave behind more than memories. They imprint invisible emotional patterns within us. Jung named this hidden force the father archetype, a universal emotional imprint we all carry, whether our fathers were loving or harsh, present or absent. This archetype shapes how we view authority, love, trust, and even ourselves. Franz Kafka, the literary genius who wrestled his entire life with an emotionally distant father, wrote hauntingly, "My writing was all about you, simply bemoaning what I could not bemoan upon your breast." Kafka knew firsthand how a father's silence or judgment could profoundly shape a person's emotional destiny. Think deeply about your own life now. Have you ever chased approval you couldn't quite grasp? Felt an ache for affection you never openly received? Have you sometimes wondered why certain emotional wounds linger despite your successes and achievements? Jung believed these quiet scars are no accident. They are the invisible emotional legacies fathers leave behind. Recognizing these hidden imprints, Jung said, is the critical first step toward emotional freedom. Until we clearly see this invisible weight, we remain unknowingly bound by it. If fathers shape us so profoundly, we must first clearly understand the father archetype itself. Carl Jung described archetypes as universal symbols imprinted deep within our human psyche, patterns shaping how we experience relationships, authority, and even our sense of self. The father archetype in particular symbolizes structure, protection, and wisdom, but it also carries shadows, authoritarian control, emotional distance, and oppressive dominance. Picture the father archetype as a great oak tree, solid, protective, offering shelter and stability. Beneath its branches, children grow confident, secure, and supported. But what if the tree's branches extend too far, blocking out essential sunlight, leaving nothing beneath able to grow? This metaphor captures the delicate balance of fatherhood. Fathers must guide yet allow freedom, protect yet permit independence, lead yet encourage autonomy. Any imbalance, too much control or too little emotional warmth, can quickly become destructive. Consider the ancient African tale of Mwindo. His father, Shemwindo, feared his son's potential greatness and repeatedly tried to suppress him. Each attempt to dominate his son only strengthened Mwindo's resolve and determination. This timeless story captures Jung's vital insight. When fathers rely too heavily on dominance, they risk provoking resistance, rebellion, or lifelong emotional wounds. Think now about Jennifer, who grew up under a strict and critical father. Even simple laughter at the dinner table could trigger harsh reprimands, leaving Jennifer walking on eggshells, anxious and afraid to make mistakes. Today, Jennifer struggles with chronic anxiety, haunted by a persistent fear of failure. Her father's rigid authority didn't teach strength. it instilled lifelong emotional fragility. Michael's experience illustrates another facet: emotional absence. Michael's father was physically absent, consumed by his work. To Michael, his father's absence became a loud silence, a constant presence of rejection and indifference. Years later, Michael still finds himself emotionally withdrawn, hesitant in intimacy, perpetually uncertain of his worth. Jung highlighted that physical absence could magnify emotional impact, creating an inner emptiness that lingers. But there is yet another provocative angle to consider. Feminist philosopher Mary Daly challenged traditional views of fatherhood directly, arguing that society often misuses fatherly authority, reinforcing oppressive power structures under the disguise of order and discipline. Daly's critique pushes us to ask boldly, have we inherited harmful beliefs about what it means to be a father? Has fatherhood's true meaning become distorted by authoritarian traditions and expectations? By clearly unveiling these complexities, both light and shadow, we start to see why the father archetype influences us so deeply. Jung insisted awareness alone holds transformative power. The moment you recognize how fatherhood's hidden legacies have shaped your emotional life, you gain the freedom to rewrite your narrative. Ask yourself now with clarity, how has the father archetype shaped your life? By naming these hidden patterns, Jung taught, we unlock a powerful path to emotional healing, autonomy, and ultimately profound inner freedom. Fatherhood is woven from complex emotional threads, and Carl Jung recognized it as terrain rich with contradictions, paradoxes that profoundly shape our lives. At its heart, the father archetype carries powerful symbols of strength, protection, and guidance. But within these virtues hide shadows, subtle contradictions capable of quietly wounding us, even when a father has the very best intentions. Take the protector paradox, a father's instinctive need to shield his child. Imagine Liam, whose father hovered protectively throughout his childhood, diligently trying to save him from every scrape, every failure, every disappointment. Liam grew up without ever truly facing the consequences of his choices. As an adult, he's paralyzed by indecision, unsure how to navigate challenges or handle setbacks. His father's protective love became an invisible barrier, robbing Liam of the very strength it aimed to nurture. Jung knew intimately that true protection must allow for vulnerability, mistakes, and the freedom to learn resilience. Without that balance, paternal care risks becoming a cage rather than a shield. Then consider the paradox of authority. Fathers are symbols of discipline and order. But what happens when that authority crosses into emotional dominance? Alexandra grew up under her father's stern gaze, his approval always hinging on perfection. Her life was a relentless quest for validation, yet nothing was ever good enough. As an adult, Alexandra carries an ever-present anxiety, haunted by her father's critical voice whispering within. Jung observed this repeatedly. Authority without empathy becomes tyranny, leaving lifelong scars of self-doubt rather than a foundation of confidence and self-respect. Perhaps most profoundly subtle is the paradox of absence. Think of Daniel, whose father was a successful entrepreneur, perpetually away on business. Daniel learned early to interpret his father's absence as silent rejection, a powerful message that shaped how Daniel saw himself and the world around him. Now, despite his own success, Daniel struggles profoundly with intimacy, always anticipating rejection, always doubting whether he deserves genuine affection. Jung taught that emotional absence could echo louder and longer than active criticism, creating internal voids that become challenging to fill. Yet fatherhood's shadows stretch even deeper, touching the fabric of society itself. Feminist philosopher Mary Daly boldly argued that society often glorifies fatherhood's shadow side, disguising authoritarian control as necessary discipline and emotional distance as strength. Daly's challenge prompts us to question our inherited beliefs about what makes a good father. Have we unconsciously accepted emotional harm disguised as traditional virtues? Have we perpetuated damaging patterns simply because they've been passed down unquestioned? By recognizing and naming these paradoxes openly, we begin the profound work of healing. Jung believed these contradictions aren't merely abstract concepts, they're deeply embedded emotional patterns silently influencing our daily lives. Ask yourself now, have you experienced a father's protective love becoming stifling, authority transforming into judgment, or absence magnifying emotional pain? Jung insisted that by clearly understanding these paradoxes, we unlock the ability to free ourselves from their silent grip, transforming inherited emotional wounds into powerful sources of insight and self-awareness. Recognizing the shadows and paradoxes embedded in the father archetype is only the beginning of true emotional freedom. To fully heal, Carl Jung taught us, we must courageously confront these wounds, not merely understand them intellectually, but actively address them emotionally. Healing demands facing our deepest vulnerabilities, acknowledging the pain we've carried silently, and consciously choosing to rewrite our emotional legacy. Consider Nadia, whose father was emotionally distant, rarely expressing affection or approval. Nadia grew up feeling perpetually unseen, striving endlessly for recognition from others. Yet through deep introspection and therapy, Nadia gradually realized she had internalized her father's silence as evidence of her own inadequacy. With guidance, she began to write daily letters she'd never send, expressing openly all the feelings she'd hidden. This simple yet powerful practice allowed Nadia to finally articulate her pain clearly. She transformed silence into expression, discovering a profound sense of validation not dependent on external approval. Jung emphasized precisely this truth. Emotional healing requires consciously voicing what has been long unspoken, freeing us from silent burdens. Then there's Antonio, whose father's explosive temper defined his childhood. Antonio vowed never to replicate this anger, yet found himself as an adult slipping into familiar patterns, his father's voice harsh and judgmental, echoing from his own lips. Jung described this as confronting the shadow, the unconscious parts of ourselves we most fear and deny. Antonio sought therapy and learned techniques to pause before reacting, creating conscious gaps between emotion and action. Over time, his reactions softened, anger transforming gradually into patience. By confronting and consciously integrating his father's shadow within himself, Antonio broke the cycle, reshaping his family's emotional future. Jung revealed that each of us carries an internalized father figure, what he called the inner father. This inner figure influences our self-talk, decisions, and emotional responses. Without conscious awareness, this internal father might repeat harmful emotional scripts, perpetuating patterns we inherited. But Jung insisted we hold within ourselves the power to rewrite these narratives, to consciously nurture an internal father who embodies compassion, wisdom, and genuine emotional strength. Reflect honestly now. What wounds from your father have you silently carried? Have you internalized his criticism, his absence, his emotional distance? Jung believed true emotional freedom arises when we recognize clearly these hidden influences and then courageously choose new ways of relating to ourselves. You have the capacity to become the nurturing father figure you needed, providing the compassion, guidance, and validation once missing. This conscious choice transforms emotional wounds into deep sources of strength and empathy. This journey demands vulnerability, reflection, and courage, but the rewards are profound. By directly confronting and actively healing your father wound, you reclaim emotional autonomy, breaking the cycle of inherited pain. Jung emphasized that when we heal ourselves, we transform not only our lives, but also the emotional lives of those around us. Your courage to rewrite your emotional narrative has the power to reshape generations, turning silent wounds into visible strength, fear into compassion, emotional distance into genuine intimacy. Ultimately, confronting your father wound isn't merely about your past. It's about reclaiming your future, becoming consciously empowered, emotionally mature, and deeply compassionate. Jung's profound message is clear. Your past does not define your emotional destiny. By confronting the shadows openly, you reclaim the authority to craft an emotional legacy defined not by inherited pain, but by conscious, courageous compassion. Transformation requires profound courage, the bravery to face our hidden emotional truths and actively rewrite the narratives that silently shape our lives. Carl Jung emphasized that understanding our wounds intellectually is just the beginning. True emotional freedom demands confronting our past head-on, daring to challenge the stories we've carried within ourselves for years, stories often silently passed down from our fathers. Recall Kafka, whose lifelong struggle with his emotionally distant father haunted him deeply. Kafka wrote his father a deeply personal letter, one he never dared send. Yet even unsent, the act of writing allowed Kafka to finally confront the silent burden he'd internalized, the belief that he was unworthy of affection. This symbolic confrontation was Kafka's first courageous step toward emotional healing. His story reminds us that confronting our past is more than external. It requires recognizing and transforming the internal voice that whispers our father's judgments as our own. Now consider Elise, a talented lawyer admired by all who knew her. Yet beneath her confidence lay hidden anxiety, a relentless drive rooted in a belief she never consciously chose. I must achieve perfection to be loved. Her father's emotional withdrawal had quietly convinced her that acceptance must be earned endlessly, through flawless accomplishments. The true turning point came for Elise during a quiet evening as she stumbled upon research revealing a surprising fact. Nearly 70% of adults unknowingly carry emotional scripts inherited from distant or critical parents. This discovery was like a light illuminating Elise's hidden motivations. She began writing letters, not to her father, but to her younger self, letters filled with compassion and the unconditional acceptance she had always craved. Through this gentle act of self-dialogue, Elise gradually replaced the critical voice within with one of self-love and reassurance. Jung knew this clearly. The courage to rewrite your story is the profound act of consciously replacing inherited wounds with compassionate truths. Consider your own life now. Have you unknowingly internalized a narrative that keeps you emotionally trapped? Perhaps believing love must be earned through achievement, or that emotional distance is safer than intimacy. Jung called this internalized voice our inner father, an unconscious authority shaping our self-worth and relationships. Without recognizing it clearly, we remain captive to old emotional scripts. Yet, Jung promised, we have the extraordinary power to rewrite these narratives consciously, reclaiming emotional autonomy and genuine self-respect. This act of rewriting is not abstract. It directly shapes your daily emotional reality. Each conscious choice you make to offer compassion instead of criticism, vulnerability instead of emotional distance, encouragement instead of judgment, reshapes your internal narrative. Imagine vividly, what would it feel like to consciously replace your inner critic with an inner mentor, offering you daily reassurance and unconditional acceptance? Jung emphasized that your choice to rewrite your story not only transforms your life, but profoundly influences everyone around you, partners, children, friends, creating a ripple effect of emotional healing. This courageous act of rewriting requires continuous vulnerability, deep honesty, and profound self-awareness. But Jung insisted the rewards far outweigh the risks. When you consciously replace inherited emotional burdens with compassionate inner truths, you unlock profound emotional freedom. Your emotional past no longer defines your future. You become the wise, compassionate author of your own story. At the heart of Carl Jung's transformative insights lies an empowering truth. Within you lies the capacity to become the father you always needed. Regardless of your personal history or emotional inheritance, Jung taught us that we hold profound power, the power to consciously reshape our internal father figure, replacing inherited wounds with emotional wisdom, strength, and deep compassion. Khalil Gibran, the poet-philosopher renowned for his profound reflections on relationships, beautifully wrote, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself." Gibran captured the essence of authentic fatherhood perfectly. It involves nurturing without possessiveness, guiding without dominating, and loving without conditions. Jung echoed this truth powerfully, teaching us that emotional maturity arises when we consciously embody these nurturing qualities within ourselves, regardless of whether we become literal parents. Think deeply about Daniel, whose father was a successful entrepreneur frequently away, leaving Daniel emotionally uncertain and lonely. Unknowingly, Daniel mirrored his father's emotional withdrawal as an adult, struggling deeply with intimacy and emotional expression. Yet after discovering Jung's ideas, Daniel decided to make a profound daily practice. Each morning, he wrote down one compassionate statement his younger self had needed but never heard. Statements like, "Your worth does not depend on approval," or "You deserve unconditional love exactly as you are." This simple but powerful exercise gradually reshaped Daniel's inner father, transforming internal emotional absence into a compassionate inner presence. Daniel not only reshaped his emotional landscape, he broke the generational cycle of emotional withdrawal, profoundly reshaping his family's emotional future. Then consider Sophia, raised under a harshly critical father whose judgments became her own internal voice of relentless self-criticism. Sophia struggled with anxiety, self-doubt, and the feeling that nothing she achieved was ever enough. Determined to rewrite her emotional legacy, Sophia began an unconventional yet powerful daily practice. Each evening before bed, she spent 5 minutes visualizing herself as a child being lovingly held and validated by a compassionate father figure. She vividly imagined hearing gentle affirmations, "You're enough. Mistakes help you grow. You're deeply loved exactly as you are." Over time, this daily visualization profoundly transformed Sophia's internal dialogue. Harsh self-criticism softened into patient encouragement, anxiety gradually gave way to self-confidence, and Sophia reclaimed genuine emotional autonomy. These powerful stories illustrate Jung's most empowering insight. Clearly, your emotional past does not define your emotional destiny. Within you lies profound power, the power to consciously become the nurturing, compassionate father figure you needed but may never have experienced. This conscious emotional choice profoundly reshapes your life and positively impacts everyone around you. Reflect deeply now. What qualities did you most need in your father that you can consciously embody within yourself today? Jung emphasized that emotional maturity occurs not as abstract ideals but as daily emotional choices. Every act of self-validation, every compassionate internal dialogue, every gentle encouragement moves you further along this transformative journey. Ultimately, becoming the father you needed is not merely about personal healing. It's about reclaiming emotional autonomy, breaking generational cycles of pain, and consciously creating a powerful new emotional legacy. Jung's profound message resonates clearly. Your father's wounds do not define your future. Instead, they become your deepest source of compassion, wisdom, and strength. By consciously transforming emotional inheritance into authentic emotional maturity, you rewrite not just your emotional story, but the emotional story of generations to come. Now take a moment and share your thoughts. What emotional legacy do you consciously choose to create for yourself and those you love? Your story matters deeply, and by sharing it, you help others discover their courage to transform inherited wounds into powerful emotional wisdom.